Hello and welcome back to KPVM. Yes, I can speak today. Hello and welcome back to KPVM TV's Young at Heart. My name is Shane Corson, your co-host today. And from one type of depression to the next. Not saying that this is depressing here. No, actually what we're going to talk about today, Flo and I, is Flo has some information that she wants to share with us regarding the Great Depression and sort of how the people lived at that time, and we're also going to draw some comparisons to the recession/depression that we've had going on for many years now. So first, a little bit of information, a little bit of statistical, boring kind of numbers information, just to frame the topic. The Great Depression. It began. A lot of people say it began in about 1930, after a certain act had passed. That act called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff, which passed on June 17th, was in a lot of people's minds the catalyst that really launched us into the Great Depression. That act raised tariffs on over 20,000 imported goods imported into the United States, and as a result of that tariff, there were retaliatory tariffs enacted by other countries, which just ended up raising the prices of goods going out of America, coming into America, going into France, coming out of France, Germany, Great Britain, pretty much everywhere. And that really was had a snowball effect. By the mid-30s, the U.S. was down 66% on its imports, 61% on its exports, and keep in mind, though, that numbers can paint a picture however you want to see it. And I'll have just a bit more information on those two numbers at the end of this interview. The Great Depression had devastating effects on many countries, regardless of their existing wealth. Personal income was affected, tax revenue, profits, and prices for nearly everything dropped. Unemployment, something that a lot of us deal with today, at the time rose to its greatest level of 25% unemployment in the United States. Countries that relied primarily on sector industries such as cash cropping, mining, logging, those are the countries that suffered the most. So if you can see kind of a comparison between then and now, there are actually a lot of comparisons to be made. Okay, many economies began to recover by the mid-30s, but negative effects of the Great Depression really persisted throughout the end of World War II. The end of World War II was roughly about 1945. So from 1930 to 1945, that's 15 years of depression and recession. I think ours officially started in 2007, so hopefully we won't have that long to go, but we're not out of the woods, not by any means. So today we have Flo Provenza, our wonderful historian, who is here to talk to us about the times of the Great Depression and what life was really like. Flo, welcome.
Hi.
Thank you for being here.
One of the things you said, I have to make a comment on. When you say that the employment went down 25%, what you're not taking into account is the fact that women didn't work then.
Right. The numbers can really paint a different picture. Yeah.
It was all men, so that's all families.
Right.
When you say that many, it's a whole family because women didn't work.
So, in other words, maybe the impact was even greater?
Oh, what happened was greater, I think.
Yeah.
I really do. And to start out my life about the Depression, I was born in 1925. I had a 6-year-old sister when I was born. And at the time that when 1930 came, my father had a very successful business. You're pointing.
Sorry.
My father had a very successful business. He had quite a few men working for him. And at 5 years old, I had a fur coat. We lived in a beautiful yellow brick bungalow right behind my grandfather's old farmhouse. I had a whole big lot to play in with a cousin and their family living in the same kind of bungalow, reversed so that the steps came down to that lot from each house. We were doing very, very well. My father, hardly anybody had cars then. They were so expensive. And my dad actually had what you call a touring car. We had isinglass windows that snap in and out. And, all the equipment for him to do his business and all those people working. We had a maid that used to come in and clean the house. And both houses, my aunts, because we were related, remember, Passmore, Vandorp, Vandorp, Passmore. And uncles across the alley. And all of a sudden, I think once before I mentioned this, that my mother had showed me these boxes. When people built a house, my father had an excavating company, and the horses that pulled that Michigan shovel, and men that held the handles and dug down, and then they dug the corners by hand, and then they put the concrete in. My uncle next door, who was part of my father's business in a way, was a carpenter, so he did carpenter work in the houses. We had stacks of little folders, which I mentioned once before, with what people owed and when they paid us. There weren't such things as mortgages. You owed the money to the people who built your house, more or less. And then when the Depression came, there was nothing. There were no buildings being built, no carpenter work being done. The rest of the family, most of the young fellows in the family, we had, my mother's brother was like in his 20s living with us, and he was out of work. My dad was out of work. My uncle across the way was out of work. I think one uncle worked for a while, and one was on call for the railroad. And if somebody didn't show up for the railroad, especially in the middle of the night, somebody that was working, if they didn't show up, my uncle would call our house, wake my father up 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and he would go out and be the switchman for the railroad out in Franklin Park outside of Chicago.
Just stepped in to do the job when it was required.
And anybody in the family got a job for even a few days. That meant they would go out, maybe buy a chicken or buy some meat, and we'd have, the whole family would eat good. I remember my mother cooking during the Depression. If she got a little ball of ground meat, she would make a meatball, put a lot of spices and everything, make a meatball. She'd get that great big soup pot. Everybody had gardens. In our backyards, we raised everything we could raise. And my mom would put that meatball in the middle of that big pot of water, throw in a bunch of vegetables, and make a big pot of very little.
Right.
But with some flavor in it.
Yeah.
And that then everybody'd come for dinner that night.
All right. I'm somebody my age who didn't live through the Depression, who was born well after it, and really I haven't had to experience some of those things. And certainly even now, I can go to the store, I can buy hamburger, chicken, whatever I want, really. Now, but somebody my age, I don't really understand maybe everything that was going on back in the 20s. Why is it that just a small ball of hamburger or meat would be so difficult to find? Was it because it just simply wasn't there, or it was too expensive?
You had to buy it.
So it was expensive.
The touring car, because of gas and insurance or whatever they had, maybe they didn't even have insurance back then. The touring car was stored in the garage, and it was locked for years. One of the men that worked for my dad, back then when my dad was in business doing that, even about the time I was born or before, there were buggies and horses. And then there were also a few automobiles, those real tinny things that women didn't know how to drive. One of the men that worked for my dad, Fred Nelson was his name, some woman lost control of a car on Cicero Avenue because the horses got excited and went the wrong way, and she thought she was going to hit the horses, and instead she went up on the curb and she hit Fred.
Oh no.
Now here he is, no relatives.
Hold on a second. Before you start into that, we have to go to commercial break here.
Okay.
It's already 10 minutes, but we're going to be right back right after these messages, and we're going to continue talking with Flo Provenza.